Hi everyone, my name is Ierie, and this is Reminisce with This, where I just sit and reminisce with you on all of the different hobbies, interests, and collections that I've obtained over the years, but all of the amazing memories that I've gained along the way with some amazing people and some really great places that I've been able to experience. Today is Favorite Friday, and I wanted to continue a little bit on one of my favorite TV shows, but also an actor that played a huge part in my upbringing of my childhood. And of course, Tim Curry. Without Tim Curry, we wouldn't have had one of the greatest Nickelodeon shows, in my opinion, of all time, with that being the Wild Thornberrys. The Wild Thornberrys is honestly one of my favorite shows, and it brings me back to when I was a little kid. I was obsessed with animals, Animal Planet, anything that involved animal documentaries and stuff like that. So when Wild Thornberrys was introduced in the late 90s to the early 2000s, I was infatuated. I absolutely loved the idea of a character being able to speak to animals and to be able to be a part of a family that traveled around seeing all of the amazing animals and places and just experience worlds that I necessarily probably never really knew about. As a little kid, a lot of the different animals that came about and the learnings of them and just the amazing storylines that they shared each and every episode was something that I held on to so dearly. I absolutely did, and I can say this with the most admiration of my animal toys and things like that. I absolutely loved the African animals of sorts, the elephants, the hippos, the rhinos, and so many more, honestly, that I had so many different animal toys growing up as a kid that anytime the Wild Thornberrys was coming on, I had to gather all of my figures and toys and stuff like that and create my own adventures or follow along with the Wild Thornberrys. And I just remember watching these shows in awe and, being very grateful. This is one of the Nickelodeon shows that my grandma actually allowed us to watch growing up as a kid just because it was very, in a way, wholesome. It was kind of, something that my grandma saw as definitely kid friendly. There was no like crazy innuendos or stuff like that that kind of went over our heads as kids, but more so this just really catered to a lot of the different teachings of different animals and being respectful of animals and just the nature at hand. And this is kind of one thing that at a point in time and when I was a kid, I wanted to be, a veterinarian and I wanted to help out animals and stuff like that. Lo and behold, truth be told, I'm allergic to just about every animal on the planet. But, it's one of those shows that still is one of my all-time favorites that Nickelodeon has ever put out. And, having Tim Curry be a part of this cast is one reason why I wanted to talk about it today. He added so much substance and character and fun, witty, and just over eccentric father. Really created a wholesome family dynamic. Just very it really was just a spectacular time growing up with these shows and having Tim Curry play such a huge pertinent part into my upbringing. And I look back to these moments of being at my grandma's and, she would babysit for us kids and, there was no better time to allow our imaginations to roam free as kids than if we weren't at our grandma's. I'm sure most people can attest to this. But my grandma was very much so that type of person of, go out and play in the real world, but also allow yourself to be kids and allow your imagination to roam free. And a lot of the times growing up in Utah, it wasn't always super weather friendly for us kids to go out and play. So she always did the most exciting kind of experiences for us kids, and did the absolute best for us, and always got us some of the coolest toys. Like I had stated in a previous video, my grandma used to work at Desert Industries, which we called DI growing up as a kid, and she would get all of these different toys and things like that for really cheap. And it was just part of a great point of imagination that we would get all of these fun dinosaurs or animals, and then we would recreate our own episodes of the Wild Thronberrys. And I just remember watching this time and time again at my grandma's and having snack time, and my grandma doing fun little things where she would use her cookie cutters that were like animals and stuff, but then cut out certain shapes in our sandwiches for, the animals or the Wild Thornberrys or whatever we were watching that day. And my grandma really just made those memories so much more enjoyable, where this is such a wholesome show for me. It brings me back to such an amazing time period, and from every episode, it's so quirky and so much fun, and you learn a lot, and it's kind of, in a way, a very kid-friendly, Animal Planet of sorts. And a lot of them, if I'm not mistaken, are factual. I could be mistaken on that, but a lot of the things that they talk about are very kid-friendly when it comes to animals. And we follow Eliza and her family as they travel through different, places and meet new animals. And because Eliza can talk to animals, she's able to, talk to all these crazy animals. And you kind of, as a kid, I, used to think of all of the possibilities of, is that what this animal's actually thinking? And growing up semi by a farm, and helping out my grandma's old bishop on their farm and the farm animals, it always made me think and wonder what they were thinking if I could talk to them. And it was just a lot of fun, honestly. Like, I just had some of the best memories made. And of course, after episodes of the Wild Thornberrys, or whatever may it be, my grandma would, because I was a kid that was allergic to bubble bath per se, my grandma would get like the Aveeno like oatmeal bath. And when I wanted to play in a bath, because I just saw a water episode of some kind of aquatic type episode of the Wild Thornberrys, and I wanted to recreate that, my grandma would do the best to really bring that imagination to the forefront, and give me an Aveeno oatmeal bath where she would be like, well, this is like the murky waters of the whatever may it be. And I would spend countless hours, and I do mean hours, in the bath just playing and having such a fun time and recreating these moments. And I was very lucky. Like I said, my grandma was able to get her hands on a lot of crazy fun toys that necessarily would be out of our price range, brand new. But there were times that I did have little Eliza figures, and Darwin and Donnie and the gang of the family, and I would just be recreating these moments. And I could picture each character's voice in my head as they're talking, and doing the parents of the the filming moment, or the kids adventures that were going on. And these particular shows, I I just look back so fondly, and the movie is, well, like, what an amazing movie at that time. And I'm so glad that I was able to grow up in the time period that I did, because we didn't have a whole lot, but what we did have, it was always just a place to allow our imaginations to roam free. And like I said, my grandma helped create a lot of stuff. My grandma was a very artistic and creative person, and so when we would have ideas as kids of like how we want to create something, my grandma would help us create, these different environments, if you will, with toys and figures. And I remember there was a few different times in Boy Scouts where I had to create some kind of scenery or something like that, where my grandma was so artistic that she helped me create something with dinosaurs, and we had to talk about all of the different dinosaurs and stuff like that. And then she helped me create one with animals, and because I knew so much about different animals and dinosaurs, my grandma always spent that extra time to really, really allow my creativity to roam free. And she would help me with the ideas that I had in my mind, because she too was a creative person, was able to just help me create some really amazing memories. And I just thought it was like the coolest thing in the world that my grandma was so, like, to me, she was and still is one of my biggest heroes. And I just looked up to her and her creativity. And she never made me feel like what I was creating was stupid or whatever. She would have little suggestions of how to make it better, most definitely. But she was a very, like I said, a very creative person herself. So when it came to creativity, it was just great. And a lot of these, like I said, a lot of this show incorporated a lot of my just overall appreciation for the animal kingdom of all sorts. And I just look back so fondly at these moments, and just, like, I cannot be in more gratitude because of this particular show. It really was one that my grandma would sit and watch with us kids. And there wasn't I shouldn't say there wasn't too many cartoons that my grandma wanted to sit down and watch with us kids, but the Wild Thornberrys was one that she actually did enjoy with us kids. It was one that, she actually at one point owned the Wild Thornberrys movie because she enjoyed watching it. And she just loved like I said, the very wholesome nature of this family traveling around and filming and having an animal documentary series where they found new animals and things like that and talked about them from the parents' side. And then you saw, of course, the kids' side and the kids' adventures, and just all of the amazing conversations that Eliza would have with animals. And just honestly, it really did beckon the thought of, like, I really wonder what these animals are thinking. And asking my grandma the same thing, like, what do you think these the neighbors' horses or animals are thinking? Like, what conversations do you think you would have? Or my grandma's favorite mammal or animal, aquatic creature, if you will, was a dolphin. And I used to ask her, like, if you could ever have a conversation with a dolphin, what do you think it would be like? And these are the types of things that, if it wasn't for the Wild Thornberrys and all of that, I don't think that we would have had so many crazy conversations, because of course there was just so many wonderful moments in this show that really did beckon these questions. Then of course my grandma would ask me the same thing, like, if you could talk to one animal, what animal would you want to talk to? And me being the kid that I was, I still am to this day, my favorite animal is an elephant. I'm obsessed with them. I think they are some of the most magnificent and beautiful creatures on this planet. And that's just from what my own appreciation for them are. Now, I don't disregard any other animals. It's just one of my favorites of all time. But just the imaginations of a kid of, like, having the conversations where I remember being like, do you really like peanuts? I would ask them, do you really like peanuts? Because me as a kid, I loved peanuts. Like, they were my all-time favorite snack. And, I of course, you saw that a lot in like movies and depictions that elephants liked peanuts and this and that and the other. And, I just remember asking, or telling my grandma that's one of the questions I would ask and talk to them about like that. And, just the little crazy things that, little kids think about. And this show, again, is so wholesome. And, you have the teenager that's just, as much as she acts as if she doesn't care about where she's at, she really does enjoy, the family craziness. And, as I got older, I can kind of understand Debbie as well. And, the whole family is just amazing. And I really cannot be in more gratitude for Tim Curry lending his voice for such a placeholder show for my life, and one that I own every episode, so I can sit down and watch them. But for people that don't have them, if you do have Paramount Plus, if I'm not mistaken, they should be on there, as it is primarily a lot of the Nickelodeon shows are on there. But it's funny, it's kooky, it's crazy. Sometimes they can even kind of bring out those cringy moments, because it's kind of like watching, a sitcom of sorts. You get kind of cringy for like moments that you're like, oh, that made me uncomfortable, just because of just the situation at hand. And that's kind of like the show. It's a very family dynamic, in a way, an animated sitcom of sorts. And I just absolutely love it. I love the adventures that they go on. I love the different types of animals and the different animals and things like that they get to meet and interact with, and the different tribes of people, and just overall the appreciation that this show showed so many different cultures of life, and how to continuously respect others based on their cultures. And it was just very wholesome, and it's one reason why I absolutely have such an mad appreciation for the world at hand, and the different cultures and the different animals that come from cultures. Is it kind of started here. And so that's just kind of what this is. The show is really just a really beautiful show, and there's so many wonderful memories tied into this, and so many journeys and adventures that I had. And I really gotta say, like, a big thank you to this particular show, but also the amazing people in my life that just always allowed me to have my imagination roam as wild and free as I wanted it to. And so, yeah, it's very spectacular. And I really, just in honor of Tim Curry, this is one of the favorite shows that I really, wanted to touch on. That he was a big portion of my childhood, and the amazing journeys that I had and adventures, and just being able to be a kid. And I really do appreciate him as a voice actor and an actor in general. Another one of my favorite shows that he had stints in was the animated series The Mask. I loved that show. I own all of that on digital copy myself. And there's just so many wonderful cartoons and things that as a little kid we were more likely to watch his kid-friendly animated shows or movies than we necessarily would have been more his adult stuff. And that's kind of where my appreciation for Tim Curry comes from. He was an amazing voice actor, amazing artist in all that he did, so diverse, and such a stellar human. And I'm honored that I got to grow up with Tim Curry. I'm honored that I got to share these shows and memories with some of the most amazing people in my life that are no longer here themselves. And, you know, it's just a huge full circle moment of appreciation. So I absolutely love the Wild Thornberrys, and I will probably start this show all over again because it's been a minute and I think I need some refreshing. But with that being said, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me and just hearing me ramble on about the Wild Thornberrys and Tim Curry a little bit. It is always a blessing to re-dive back into moments of my life and share a little bit and why these shows or movies or moments just really mean something to me. So, with that being said, I want to say thank you again. And as always, if you have not been told you were loved, cherished, and or cared about today, just know I love you, I cherish you, and I care about you. Until the next time, I will catch you later. Peace.